According to the American Cancer Society, firefighters face an incredibly high risk of cancer due to the toxic smoke, diesel exhaust, and chemicals they encounter on the job. On-duty firefighters and retirees in the Mid-Ohio Valley are taking a proactive stand by undergoing critical pre-cancer screenings to detect one of the most lethal forms of the disease. Our Cassidy Fury shows us why screenings like these can be life-saving.
Dozens of Parkersburg firefighters and retirees visited the station this week to confront a silent threat that lurks long after the flames are extinguished. Local union president and Lieutenant Adam Delbaugh says proactive testing is a necessary weapon in a profession where occupational exposures are unavoidable.
So you look at the elevated risk that firefighters are under for cancer, and it's just, if there's a test available to check for that ahead of time, it wouldn't make sense not to take advantage of that. And so the earlier you can catch it, the more treatable it is. Any chance that we have to check for any type of cancer, we want to jump on it.
Lucid Diagnostics partnered with the Professional Firefighters of West Virginia to bring 5-minute esophageal cell collection sensors directly to the fire station. Program coordinator Lauren Skoglund explains why detecting precancerous changes in the esophagus is critical for first responders.
Esophageal cancer is very lethal. There's an 80% mortality rate over 5 years, and firefighters in particular are at a 62% increased risk of developing esophageal cancer just due to the occupational hazards of their job.
The entire department has become strongly aware of those hazards. They are currently rallying behind 22-year veteran Jody Ludwig, who was in Morgantown actively fighting stage 1 multiple myeloma. Ludwig has a powerful message for the younger generation of firefighters who might feel invincible early in their careers.
All the young guys, I tell them, hey, you have anything that remotely feels off about yourself or just doesn't feel right, get it looked at. I've also, my wife and I have stressed the importance to these younger kids of getting some type of cancer policy because with our job, we'd rather have something and not need it than need it and not have it.
The recent diagnosis of Ludwig and 2 recent retirees drove nearly 50 members to participate in the event this week. But Delbaugh points out that expanding these pre-screenings permanently requires breaking down long-standing culture and budget barriers.
I would say there are 2 obstacles. One of them is just awareness. Firefighters have always been the tough guys, and we kind of just ignore it. We wore dirty gear because it was a badge of honor, and the script has completely flipped in my career, and we realize how dangerous that is. And then the other side of it would be funding. These tests can be expensive, and so getting everyone to understand how important they are, to see past the cost, is the other big challenge.
The union says the recent legislative bills covering multiple cancer early detection blood tests for first responders were a crucial start, and they will continue lobbying Charleston to bring expanded pre-screening opportunities to departments statewide. Firefighters are hoping state-level legislation in Charleston will eventually secure routine coverage for all first responders. Reporting from Parkersburg, I'm Cassidy Fury with WTAP News.